illegal to either create a barricade or form some fire. We are not sure, but they definitely did not belong in the middle of the street. Right now we're still here behind law enforcement lines. It seems to be the safest place because when they do throw tear gas, it's down, down the hill, and some of our crew, including myself, don't have the equipment to stay protected from that. And let me tell you, when it hits you hard.
Absolutely, and we want you to stay protected and stay safe too. And Alicia, it just strikes me as we look at these images, you see all those officers, the National Guards members in front of the Olympic rings there at Centennial Olympic Park and Skyview Atlanta, all these iconic images that to me have made our city beautiful. Now, some may disagree, but I do think the city has made great strides in the last several years in making this an important tourist destination in downtown Atlanta.
When you see those Olympic rings and you think back to 1996 and how the world came together and gathered here in Atlanta to steal a phrase I think from Ashley a moment ago, it looks like a war zone tonight. And again, we've seen now several individuals, like 2 females and 1 man at least, arrested over the last 2 nights. At least 228 people arrested. You see the officers with the zip ties out there. They are ready to go. Man at least arrested over the last 2 nights. At least 200. And really that 9 p.m. curfew, which is now past due. Haley Mason is there as well. Haley, what are you seeing at this moment?
Just minutes after we last took this live shot, take a look at behind me what has changed. Atlanta police officers are moving in with guardsmen just under the Skyview Ferris wheel, just a block away from Centennial Olympic Park. They are getting ready to head out down this street. Again, we are at Ted Turner and Lucky Street in downtown Atlanta. Just to give you a little bit of perspective, right under the Skyview Ferris wheel, that is the construction site that was being raided by people who wanted to take bricks and steel and iron and pieces of really heavy equipment that could do some damage. Well, you can see that construction site, Eric, right under the Skyview Ferris wheel. Tear gas went flying everywhere. And right now, to my right, you see guardsmen in shields. To my left, right past Ted Turner Enterprises, you'll see the DNR, Department of Natural Resources, on ATVs going up and down this street. They are preparing for something. They are ready tonight to meet aggression with aggression, really. They're trying to stamp out what we saw Friday night, earlier than what we saw Friday night. And so protesters have scattered, but as you've heard my colleagues mention, some came ready. I've seen some protesters ready with a suitcase that says first aid on it. They have milk inside, they have soap, they have water. They have set up little hand washing stations so that people who plan to stay out are able to wipe off, wash off, pour milk on their faces and get back out again. And that's what some of the officers are up against. People who came prepared, people who know what these protests are like, and over time they have begun to change their methods too so that they don't have to go home. And unfortunately, it gets dangerous. It really gets dangerous. And so you see the guards getting in formation. We can end on this shot here. Downtown Atlanta, we're right below the Skyview Ferris wheel, Centennial Park.
All right, Haley, we'll come back to you in a bit. We do want to go to Brittany Edney. And Brittany, this certainly seems as though that, Atlanta police and the National Guard want to end this much earlier than it was ended last night, and certainly want to end it without nearly as much violence.
I don't know if you just happened to catch the tail end of that, line of law enforcement, of National Guard and APD just marching forward. I'm at Centennial right now, and I can tell you that we've seen several protesters get walked up through here by police. They have either been, detained or are getting arrested. But something is happening right now in the past 2 minutes or so, because we saw at first about 3 dozen or so APD officers take off towards, away from CNN. So we aren't sure what's going on from this vantage point, but I can tell you that around 3 to 4 dozen people just took off that way. So they are heading towards those protesters, guys.
All right, Brittany, thank you. And as we watch this scene, it certainly looks as though it's much calmer right now, Alicia. For most of our crews out in the field, we don't see any protesters or very few, so it looks as though a number of them have gotten their cars and headed back home. We are hopeful that they have headed to another location, but certainly, as I mentioned before, I do believe that Atlanta police wanted to shut things down much earlier and make sure that they got things under control in downtown and across the metro area, across the city anyway, much sooner than they did last night. Ashley Thompson is really right under Skyview, Atlanta, I believe. From your perspective, it looks as though there are no protesters in that area, at least not for now.
Hardly any, and as you said, they are trying to move these demonstrators out sooner than they did just last night. So right now we've got the guardsmen behind us with the shields kind of just blocking them, standing in a formation and really just getting ready if these demonstrators come back, getting ready to perhaps throw tear gas to push them back. A lot of the protesters came this way. They were running towards William Street when that last batch of gas was thrown. We saw a huge crowd run that way, but take a look. You can see this guy right here. He's got a gas mask on. Some of these protesters did come prepared. They've got things over their eyes, over their faces, and they've got milk. They've got whatever they need to kind of just give them some relief and get back at it. So we see some of those demonstrators up here at the AC Hotel Atlanta. As I said, a lot of them ran this way towards Williams Street when that gas was thrown. They went over there to try to get some relief. It looks like they might be just hanging out for the time being, but we can expect to see them back up here. It's kind of like, you know, they're playing chicken almost with the Georgia Guard. It's pretty insane. And so this is what we're seeing. We're seeing these guardsmen kind of just standing here, standing in formation. You know, they are prepared tonight. As we told you yesterday, law enforcement admitted they were caught off guard by just how wild things got Friday night. They said they would be prepared Saturday and tonight, and they certainly are. Last night around this time, there were more demonstrators out here. So right now, their tactics are becoming more effective. So we will continue to stay out here in this parking lot near Skyview, and we'll send it back to you guys.
All right, Ashley, and we're also seeing images of some of the protesters as well getting escorted off, getting arrested by officials that are there. Again, the images so far seemingly that law enforcement is outnumbering the number of protesters right now out in force. Brittany Miller, you've been out in the thick of it all throughout the weekend. What are you seeing right now?
Well, based on what we've seen over the past 2 days, I can tell you that officers are getting ready to make some arrests. We've seen them sort of walking down in the middle of the street, different officers from many different jurisdictions. Something that's very interesting that I haven't experienced in the past 2 days is when I tried to walk on the sidewalk, I was stopped and told that I couldn't walk with officers. Now, for the past 2 nights, if you've watched our coverage, we've been able to walk shoulder to shoulder practically with so many of law enforcement, just to give you a first-hand account of what is happening. And I was told that I could not do that today. So I'm going to try to figure out a way to sort of get around that and give you guys this live coverage. We are seeing those officers again on ATVs. I'm told that these are DNR. It actually makes them a lot easier to get around. This is something I have not seen here before in the past 3 days, but officers are not letting me walk on the sidewalk right now. I don't know what that means. I don't know why, but I'm going to try to get some answers for you and get another angle for you.
All right, Brittany, thank you. As we continue to watch, really looks like most of the protesters, maybe few stragglers, but pretty much almost a majority of the protesters have been cleared out of downtown Atlanta. Certainly, Atlanta Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms saying that she would be gauging to see whether a curfew would be needed for tonight after they looked at last night. So right now, they're trying to make sure they get things, looks as though buttoned up a lot tighter and sooner than they did last night. Brittany Edney, things pretty quiet where you are as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's a completely different scene from where we were half an hour ago and then an hour beyond that, respectively. I can tell you that we have been seeing about 5 arrests or so now come down the sidewalk right here in the distance. We see another, it's possibly 1 protester, maybe 2. I can't really see because it's not a well-lit sidewalk, but more arrests are happening. I just spoke to one man while he was physically being arrested, and he told me that he was trying to find his car, and he was not with the group. He was with another gentleman. They were both being arrested. They both were having their hands zip tied behind their backs, and he said that he was just trying to find his car and that he explained that to the officers and he was still being put under arrest. He said he was here for the protest and then was just during all the confusion trying to find his car, so he felt like it was an injustice there. That was his firsthand account that we just experienced about 30 seconds ago. But again, everything's starting to quiet down a lot. We have seen a couple dozen or so APD officers coming up and down these sidewalks. Hang on one second. What's going on right here? We're coming down the sidewalk. Two people are running. Two protesters are running. I'm not sure if police are going to pursue them or not. It looks like they are leaving and no officers are behind them. There's a gentleman to my left right now. We can see him being zip tied. Right now, this is happening live. We're about right over by Lucky Street where this is happening. We do have National Guard on our right, APD behind us, and additional law enforcement marching their way down. So we are not seeing a lot of protesters at this point. It's a heavy law enforcement. Law enforcement's out here in huge numbers, I should say. So we're not seeing that many protesters. And the ones that we are seeing are either running away or are being actively arrested, which you can see still happening right here that we're getting a view of.
Yeah, guys. Brittany, and some apparently trying to find their vehicles so they could get home in a hurry. That curfew has been in effect for a half an hour now, 9 p.m. The mayor signed an executive order extending that curfew from last night into tonight. It is up until sunrise tomorrow morning to basically get off the street and be home. This is mainly, of course, for the protesters, but for all of the city of Atlanta. And as we take a look at these live pictures right now, a starkly different appearance from this time last night, and certainly vastly different from this time on Friday. This is now the third night of protests in the city of Atlanta. We're watching a man being arrested right there as officers check his pockets for anything and put him in zip ties. So when they say get off the streets, go home, they are not kidding about this. We saw it last night. We're certainly seeing it tonight. But tonight is very different, a very different tone and tenor, Alicia, than it was last night. And the pace, things got frantic there for a bit, but it seems like they're trickling, those protesters are kind of trickling in and they're arresting them kind of one by one.
Right. And to reset the scene today, Tracy, for most of the day, the protests have been very peaceful. We had our crews marching alongside several protesters as they demonstrated down 17th Street, down Spring Street, even in downtown. Just before the 9 o'clock hour, that's where we started to see tensions escalate. We did see tear gas sprayed on some of the protesters that were there, barricades put into effect. We do have Georgia National Guardsmen here in Atlanta tonight, up to 3,000 deployed by Governor Kemp to help enforce the mayor's 9 o'clock curfew. And it did get dicey for a few minutes there, but overall, Tracy, as you echoed, a much calmer scene tonight. Fewer protesters sticking around here after the 9 o'clock hour, certainly than what we saw last night, Saturday night, and then certainly Friday night at this time. That being said right now, the curfew is in effect. As Tracy mentioned, it will stay in effect through sunrise. MARTA has been suspended until the curfew as listed as well. We have crews spread out across the metro Atlanta area to continue to cover this significant historical weekend across metro Atlanta here. I want to see if we can bring in Astrid Martinez, who's also downtown for us tonight in the middle of some of those rising tensions at the top of the hour. Astrid, if you can hear us, where are you right now and what's the scene like?
Alicia, I'm still in front of Centennial Park by the Olympic rings and the Ferris wheel. What a contrast. Our skyline so lit up. It always means something festive. We have a lot of residents and tourists that come here to celebrate music festivals, Coca-Cola, and museums. But now look at how it is on the ground. Something that you would only see in Marvel movies. Typically, this is not what we see in Atlanta. But just a couple seconds ago, before you guys came to us, we actually saw 2 inmate transportation buses pull up. We saw several law enforcement get out of those vehicles. More are joining the group that had already been here in downtown Atlanta. And it's fluid. They go between putting on gas masks, taking them off, formation, or just huddling around and talking to each other, exchanging ideas of, what is going to transpire here. Right now, we don't see any protesters in the area. They have all been exchanging out of the area. We did see a couple arrests earlier. Right now, we don't see any protesters in the area. They have all been exchanging out of the area. We did see a couple arrests, police presence, a lot of law enforcement. And if anything else happens, we'll keep you posted.
All right, Ashley, we'll chat, I'm sorry, Astrid, I apologize. We'll check back in with you in just a moment. Ashley Thompson is there, and what are we watching? What are we seeing, Ashley?
Yeah, we've got some officers making their way down Andrew Young right now up to William Street. No word on where they're going, but we know the curfew has since passed. They're really trying to get people off the streets, and there are not many people on the streets at this intersection where there's a hotel right here, and I think some of these people who are standing outside may be guests, but take a look at some of these tankers rolling in right now. This is insane. As I said earlier, this really looks like a war zone, but this is standing outside, maybe guests, but take a look at what it looks like right now. The governor and the mayor said they wanted to get people off the streets. They don't want violence. They don't want rioting. They don't want looting. And so this is the result. This is what we're going to see. This is the type of force that they are going to be using now. And it's just really astounding if you just take a look at these officers here dressed head to toe in that kind of gear. I mean, they are ready for whatever's coming, but as I said, not many demonstrators over here anymore. Let's take a look to see if we can find any. Are you guys demonstrators? Do you know there's a curfew?
9 o'clock.
9 o'clock, what are you doing outside?
I'm going to my car now.
Going to your car. Were you part of the demonstration?
Yes, I was.
Okay, and so do you know it's after the curfew?
Yes, I do. I'm well aware.
All right, what do you think when you see all of this?
I see someone trying to implement structure out here, and that's about it.
And certainly there needed to be some structure. We showed you the video of some of those demonstrators really just kind of tearing apart that construction site earlier, and we know the damage they've done to downtown Atlanta over the past several days. The mayor and the governor do not want that to happen once again for a third night. So this is what we're seeing out here, you guys. Back to you.
Yeah, Ashley, it's significant when you see the officers in their full riot gear. You see tanks driving down some of Atlanta's, most famous city streets, the city streets that tourists come to visit. You see the Olympic rings in the background of all of this, the Olympic rings that brought the city together in 1996, really the world together. And now these are the images tonight to speak to how historic this weekend has been, and certainly the last 48 hours for our city here in Atlanta. Brittany Miller, you've been on the front lines of all of this since it started really on Friday. Tell us where you are right now and what you're seeing from your vantage point.
Well, I got to tell you, we are parked here at the intersection of Centennial Olympic Park and Marietta Street because officers won't let us leave this parking lot where we are. But I can show you this show of force right now in the middle of this intersection. What powerful imagery we are looking at right now as officers stand shoulder to shoulder to do what we believe is to enforce the curfew that went into effect at 9 o'clock. You do see what we've been calling zip ties. Are actually called flex cuffs, according to one of my police sources. So I just want to make that accurate change and let you guys know what they actually are called. But this is what we're seeing right now. Officers are getting ready to make some arrests. We're also seeing a lot of just law enforcement up and down this street, getting their plans together to go throughout the streets of downtown Atlanta and take down anyone who is not abiding by that curfew and is violating that curfew. So we have seen, I will tell you, a couple of downtown Atlanta up this street and take down anyone where the officers are not abiding by that curfew. So they were violating that curfew. So we have seen, in the last couple of downtown Atlanta up this street and take down anyone where the officers are not abiding by that curfew. So they were violating that curfew. So we have seen, in the last couple of downtown. But what we're seeing is officers leave in groups and then come back in those groups. Sometimes they have people in flex cuffs, sometimes they do not. I don't see anyone under arrest with this group right now, but we don't know what's going to happen with the next wave that comes our way, guys.
Yes, and we will be watching as we take a look at Atlanta police officers in full riot gear walking down the streets in downtown Atlanta. Of course, alongside them, National Guardsmen. As we mentioned earlier, the governor extended the state of emergency so that more guardsmen could come into the state because he was concerned about protests popping up all across the state, and there have been others in other portions of the state along with here in Atlanta. 157 arrests last night. We will have to wait until either later tonight or in the morning to find out how many people officers arrested tonight on this third night of protests. Astrid Martinez is also in the thick of it, really right in front of Skyview Atlanta with all those blue flashing lights. It really gives the city, a tinge that we're not used to. Astrid, you mentioned we're used to people walking down the street after concerts or sporting events. And, now we see people being escorted in those flex cuffs in some cases by Atlanta police officers.
Yeah, we have as many lights here as we have, police officers with these plastic zip ties hanging from their belts. It's just such an incredible contrast. Like you were mentioning, Tracy, this place downtown, the lights, you have State Farm Arena, you have the Mercedes-Benz Stadium. Those are the lights that we're used to seeing here every single day in Atlanta. Something that shows joy, that says Atlanta rise up, that says Atlanta unite. And now we're seeing this. It just looks very militarized, but this was needed. Very sharp contrast to Friday night. It seems that the message here is strong and swift. They are showing that they are not tolerating what happened on Friday, and they're getting rid of any protesters that are really causing any commotion swiftly. So we don't see many people here after, obviously, the crowds were pushed back. I see like four people walking around. Law enforcement is not bothering them. They've gotten rid of the people that have really caused a lot of trouble. At least they've gotten them out of this area. But this is, the rest of the scene that I see here. You see law enforcement from all different sides. You see the guardsmen, you see police officers, and they're just, right now just standing down. I think they've done here the job for the most part.
All right, Astrid Martinez on the front lines for us there as well. I was struck a moment ago. We saw that gentleman there taking pictures. This has been a historic weekend. It's been a solemn weekend. It's been a painful weekend for so many, but certainly one that our city will not forget as we take a look at the patrols that are out right now in downtown Atlanta on Centennial Olympic Parkway, enforcing the mayor's 9 o'clock curfew, which if protesters are out right now, they are in violation of that citywide curfew. The order there hopefully to keep the peace from what we saw last night, Saturday night, and certainly Friday night as well. And we're looking at some of the guards there as well. The picture to your left at the CNN building, which was one of the places first targeted on Friday night. Brittany Miller, let's go to you again if you can hear us right now. What are you seeing?
I can hear you. We are looking at another wave of what looks to be the National Guard making their way up Marietta Street. I've been telling you, I've been seeing law enforcement in waves coming back from whatever business they are taking care of in the streets of downtown Atlanta. Something that's very interesting, if we look to the left real quick, Gino, we have seen in the past 10 minutes, officers handing out those flex cuffs to other officers. So now you see they have, bunches of them on their waistbands and really attached to their vests there. This is Atlanta police right now. This is the next wave that's going to hit the streets of downtown Atlanta and put anybody who is violating this curfew in those flex cuffs. Honestly, this is the most I've seen, if I can look at the quantity of flex cuffs that I've seen over the past 3 days that have been attached to their waistbands. I've never seen this many on their side. So that speaks to how many arrests they are willing and ready to make tonight. Again, I haven't seen anyone in handcuffs or flex cuffs coming back right now, but if you look to the right, look at how many officers are coming back from walking the streets of downtown Atlanta. Officer after officer. This is definitely a show of force here in the downtown area. Of course, as soon as we see any other arrests being made, we'll bring it to you live, guys.
All right, Brittany Miller for us. Stay safe out there tonight. Covering this on the front lines here, and yes, as we look at it tonight, it's a much different scene than what we saw over the last 2 nights, to use Brittany's words a moment ago, a show of force by Atlanta police and officials that are on the ground there, certainly outnumbering the protesters, the demonstrators that we can see right now from the vantage points. Many of those folks out today in very peaceful protests. Many have gone home to adhere to the mayor's 9 o'clock curfew put into effect. Brittany Edney joining us now as well in the middle of this as the night has progressed on. Brittany, what are you seeing right now?
Well, Alicia, our crew and I were just talking a little bit about everything that's been happening as far as these arrests for the curfew violation. And one thing that we've noticed as you guys have been coming to us throughout our show and coverage this evening is that when we come upon arrests in progress, the police seem to continue. But when we find people out here still walking, violating that curfew order, and they have not yet begun that arrest, we've noticed that APD kind of waves them on. And it's when our camera cameras around that we were kind of wondering, is everyone being a little bit more cautious because of what happened, earlier today with the firing of those multiple police officers for how they were handling these protesters? Is there more caution from APD? Is that something that's been, possibly passed down by upper management? We are not sure, but I can tell you every person that we've seen on the street where we are noticing them and APD comes into contact, they're not arresting them. It is just those ones that we happen to turn the corner and see them in progress that we're finding. I can also tell you that the streets, besides a few stragglers, have started to clear out at this point. We have also seen several people who live nearby, like offering our crew Gatorade, washcloths, and everything like that. So everyone's still trying to show a few moments of kindness out here to our CBS 46 crew. So that is definitely appreciated. But I can tell you a large majority of the people have cleared out. And sometimes we're seeing those arrests for this curfew violations, and sometimes we're not. Alicia?
All right, Brittany, end me with some perspective there. Brittany, you're referencing what Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms spoke about earlier today. Response from the city, really the nation, about Atlanta Police's what she called excessive use of force. 2 Atlanta police officers fired today after tasing 2 local college students last night. Haley Mason on the front lines with us as well. You were there last night, Haley. A much different scene 24 hours later as those curfew orders go into effect now and protesters really have dispersed.
Alicia, it's a much different scene from last night because of what happened Friday night when just to my right, a big portion of the Centennial Olympic Park was on fire behind me. You can see the National Guardsmen off to the distance to our right. And then when you pan back right to where I'm standing, you see Georgia State Patrol, Atlanta Police. They are armed and ready to arrest people if they are violating curfew. The few people that we do see standing on the corners appear to be guests of this Atlanta hotel. I believe this is the AC Hotel. We're at William Street and Andrew Young, right ahead of Ted Turner and John Portman. And it's something like we have never seen before in downtown Atlanta. The mayor and Chief Shields said they would have zero tolerance. Right now, we have gotten alerts that anyone who is breaking curfew will be arrested. We've seen it live on our air. And right now, just outside of spectators, no one's really walking these streets. They're either standing in place on a corner or they're in their rooms looking out over a balcony. And I will say it became necessary. That construction site that I showed you near the Sky View, it was completely raided. The fences are now flattened over there, and we were actually concerned because sometimes the protesters that are upset with the media as well have threatened us with rocks. They threatened us with some of those steel bars, and there were no police around just an hour ago, a little over an hour ago. And so here we are right now with just completely surrounded by law enforcement around just an hour ago, the state troopers, a little over an hour ago. The above. So here we are right now, here on the streets of Atlanta. Just look down this line. I just want you to get a look at these wooden sticks that they're holding, those zip tie bands to arrest people, and there are guns as well. It is just an incredible scene in the middle of downtown Atlanta right here on a Sunday evening where peaceful protests began to transition and shift to some unruly behavior.
To enforce that code. Let's go back back to Brittany Miller right now. It's essentially barricaded off from where the protesters had been before. Brittany, were you able to get through?
Alicia, it was hard to hear your question. Are you asking if I was able to get through where?
The police had barricaded you off last time we had spoken. I wanted to know if you've been able to change your location or what you're seeing right now.
I understand. No, we are still in this parking lot. A couple of people have actually tried to just take a step here and go onto the sidewalk here, and officers quickly say, no, no, get back, get back. So for some reason, we are being boxed into this parking lot here, but more officers are showing up. If you go to the left here, Gino, we have the officers on bikes. I have not seen them all day, but they have just showed up. So now we have all four corners of this intersection covered with law enforcement. And if you can just remember what we've seen over the past 2 days, it is now almost 10 o'clock. This time, 2 nights ago, cars were on fire, buildings were being vandalized, windows were being shattered. It was mayhem and chaos, and now it is calm and cool here at the intersection of Marietta Street and Centennial Olympic Park on night 3 of these Atlanta protests. I have not seen any other people walking back after being arrested for violating that curfew, and it looks like officers are just standing around. So I'm not sure what that means. I don't know if they're getting ready for something or if the streets are clear. Hopefully the crew that we have throughout downtown Atlanta can give us a better idea of what the scene is like there. But here it is just quiet, and that is the first time I've seen it quiet, especially at this intersection where all the protests have started in the past 3 nights, guys.
Brittany, just looking at some of the officers in the riot gear, it looked like some of them had actually taken off some of those plastic mask coverings, maybe to indicate that they wouldn't be using tear gas, at least within the next few minutes. Let's hope so. Is that what you're seeing where you are?
That is what I'm seeing. You know, whenever the gas masks go on, what I've been calling a gear change, that usually means that gas will be deployed at any moment. But they have taken that off, which usually means that they will not deploy that gas. Right now, they just have their helmets on. Some people do have their shield on top of their helmets. They just have their flex cuffs on their sides. But this is actually, how do I want to say this? This is, for lack of a better phrase, the less dressed I've seen them over the past few days. Usually they are decked out in riot gear, but right now it's just helmets and vests. And I'm sorry, I can't think of a better way to put it, but that's just the first thing that comes to mind as I'm talking to you live about what I am seeing here on the ground.
Yeah. Taking a pause from some of the tension we saw really within the last 60 minutes, things really escalated right before the 9 o'clock hour. Brittany Miller for us there. Thank you, Brittany. I want to go back over to Astrid Martinez, who's also downtown for us. Astrid, you were walking with some of the protesters earlier today. You were there as tensions really mounted, as that curfew became enforced at the top of the hour. Set the scene where you are right now. We see some of those armored vehicles making their way behind you.
Yeah, and we saw the National Guardsmen, you know, just starting to get back in those armored vehicles. We heard some instructions saying, you know, load the trucks, get in the trucks and start moving them this way. There were about 5 cars lined up here, and then the soldiers got in the vehicles and just, you know, started moving them out the way. I don't know what the instructions are for or where they're headed, but we know that they are, you know, loaded up with several soldiers inside of them, and they're backing up and just getting them ready to probably you know, face a different direction and maybe move forward or move to a different location. Right now, we do see, you know, I have law enforcement all around me. There are really no pedestrians, no civilians in this area left. You know, what a sharp contrast to what we saw earlier. Those 2 groups of demonstrators and protesters, you know, kind of collide. Law enforcement have taken over this area. They're patrolling it. They have this locked down. And then I actually spoke to one. He was able to talk to me. I went up to him and asked him if there were any more people in the area or pockets that they were monitoring. And they said this, you know, it was actually a successful night, that one of the, you know, guardsmen was able to speak to the leader of the protesters and tell them to go home, and that they agreed to. So from our vantage point, it looks like they have listened, and law enforcement, they call this tonight a successful night.
Interesting choice of words there, successful night. Certainly, Astrid, we saw a lot of those protests today, very peaceful, very solemn, very, you know, on point to the message that so many are trying to voice today. Good to hear that, at least on the law enforcement side, they're calling this night successful, even though we did see tear gas fired off. We did see some signs of aggravation earlier before the 9 o'clock curfew took effect here. Right now you're looking live at downtown Atlanta here, where law enforcement is out in full force, really way outnumbering any protesters that are left right now. Yasmina Alston, you were there last night as tensions really escalated after the curfew was put into effect. I imagine 24 hours later, this is quite different than what you experienced this time last night.
Yeah, so what we're seeing right now is a lot different from what we saw last night. You can see that Atlanta police, they are behind us in the same area near CNN Center where they've been setting up. Now, we actually went around some of the areas that some of the other reporters have been to, and we did experience the tear gas, and we had to take a quick break there. But in just going around this part of downtown, we noticed that a lot of the protesters, like some of the other reporters have said, they've gone home. We're not seeing that same crowd that we saw earlier in the evening and earlier tonight. There is just a really large law enforcement presence. We've seen the National Guard, we've seen Atlanta Police, I've seen Georgia State Patrol all throughout the downtown area. But you're taking a live look here at Atlanta Police. They have this area blocked off here by the CNN Center where we initially saw all of that chaos and destruction on Friday night and then again on Saturday. I know earlier in the night I heard Ashley describe downtown Atlanta as a war zone, and that was exactly what it felt like. Again, things have significantly calmed down as we're just seeing law enforcement in the area now and not that same large group of protesters that we were seeing earlier.
Yasmina, thank you. And of course, if we kind of continue to look around the downtown area, that's where much of the protest had been centered throughout this afternoon, this evening. Brittany Edney is out not too far from Skyview, Atlanta. You kind of see it in view there. Where we see a lot of armored vehicles as well. So certainly the presence of the police officers there and the National Guard units and even those DNR officers on those ATVs have made a difference. We see some of those ATVs behind you, Brittany.
Yeah, you hit it. We are right underneath the Skyview off of Lucky Street, and you are starting to see Georgia State Patrol, DNR, also Clayton County Police, multiple SWAT units heading out down Lucky Street. We've also seen the ATVs just about to take off as well over here. We've got DNR still gathering right over here. At this point, though, I can tell you that they are still out on patrol tonight, and we have not seen a lot of
là đêm qua
khoảng
xung quanh nhà mình tối thui đen như mực hơi ớn, chỉ có cũng may là có cái ánh tối hôm qua cái ánh trăng nó cũng sáng. Được cái là tối hôm qua ánh trăng nó sáng, cho nên là mình nhìn ra ngoài đường mình cũng thấy được cái khung cảnh ngoài đường nó sáng bởi ánh trăng. Còn đèn điện là cũng như tắt hết. Mình hơi sợ một chút, có lẽ do mình bị ám ảnh cái vụ bạo động mấy ngày nay cho nên là hơi ớn, nhưng mà rất may là không gì xảy ra. Và sáng nay mà khi mà ngủ dậy mà đi ra đường thì mình cảm thấy là mọi thứ rất là yên bình. Trên đường hôm nay vắng xe cộ hơn ngày hôm qua hẳn. Không biết là do mọi người đã được
Brittany Miller referenced that before. At this time on Friday we were watching police vehicles burn and a number of people vandalizing parts of the CNN Center and the CNN sign. And up and down Marietta Street, really vandalizing and looting a number of businesses in that area. And we're not saying all the protesters are doing this by any means. A majority of the protesters were there to do one thing, to basically voice concern and voice outrage over the indignity that many African American men are suffering at the hands of law enforcement, and unfortunately the excessive use of force that has led to the deaths of a number of people, including George Floyd's death in Minneapolis on Monday, which is what sparked so much of this. But on Friday, just a vast difference, and it was such a rough day for so many of us in Atlanta who love the city to watch parts of it burn and for so many portions of it to be destroyed. And then we have yesterday where the mayor said, you know what, we are going to put in a curfew, and the chief of police saying, I will make arrests. I'm not afraid to arrest people, and that is exactly what happened. We ended up with 157 arrests, and then today, a vast difference when we have an extreme number of law enforcement out in force, standing shoulder to shoulder with Atlanta police officer, National Guardsmen as well. And for now, we are seeing calm in the city of Atlanta.
Của căn nhà mà mình không quay một vòng cái vườn sau của căn nhà này mà đang đứng. Bạn thấy nè.
All right, welcome to CBS 46 News. We have continuous coverage. We've been wall to wall since 6 o'clock this evening, Alicia, I think, as we watch protests unfold across the city in Midtown, in Marietta, in Cobb County, and in downtown as well. And things started out very peaceful. To kind of give you an idea of where we are today. A 9 p.m. curfew has been in effect for the last hour, and police, law enforcement, state police officers, DNR officers out there as well, National Guardsmen, making quick work of arresting anyone who is violating that curfew. We saw a number of protesters, a handful of protesters really trying to make a barricade between themselves and police. Tear gas went off, and that's when police made a quick show of force as well. Across the state of emergency has been extended through the end of this weekend, where Governor Brian Kemp has called in 3,000 National Guard troops across the state to help keep the peace. Again, that 9 p.m. curfew in effect. National Guard troops, we've seen them out in force in their riot gear. They have been given riot training in order to prepare for this right now. MARTA has been shut down since 9 o'clock, and pretty much everyone told if you were out on the street, get home. That 9 o'clock curfew is in effect, Alicia.
That's right, Tracy, and right now we have certainly seen the number of law enforcement personnel outnumber the number of protesters that remain. To set the scene, Atlanta, one of many cities across the nation that really has spent the weekend protesting the injustice that we have seen now recorded. Cell phone video really being a big catalyst in this weekend's movement, this weekend's outcry, if you will, not only here in Atlanta, but across the U.S. The protest mostly peaceful here in Atlanta. That was not the case in cities like Philadelphia as well as Chicago earlier today, but mostly peaceful until we approach that 9 o'clock curfew hour, and then we certainly see law enforcement out and about. It's been striking to us, Tracy, all throughout the day too as well, when you see the Olympic rings there and the protest happening just in front of those rings on some of the most popular tourist streets here. It looks like a war zone, to recap some of the words used earlier today. And a change of scenery from what we typically expect for downtown Atlanta. We have our reporters covering this from all angles, positioned downtown. We want to go to Brittany Edney right now, who is right downtown, not too far away from those Centennial Olympic Park rings. Brittany, what are you seeing right now?
Well, Alicia, I wanted to do a walkthrough of a scene that we saw earlier when complete mayhem was unleashing at this construction site, when we saw dozens of protesters knocking down these fences and trying to create barriers between law enforcement and themselves. One thing that kind of told our crew to get out of there quickly was when a protester said that this large fuel tank over there, that people were trying to light that. And then we also saw about a dozen or so people start to take a lot of the debris, the wood, the different supplies from this construction site, throw it into a pile in front of that barrier that they created from that barricade, and they lit that on fire. Now, luckily, the flames didn't take off. It didn't really take, but I can tell you that that is when law enforcement started to push their way down this street, is when everything started to kind of go chaotic towards this construction scene. That is when multiple CBS 46 reporters and their photographers and their security teams, they all started to get hit along with protesters by that tear gas. And so this is kind of what's left of that scene now. You can see kind of like the footprint of where these fences were taken down by law enforcement as they pushed their way back against those protesters. But again, this was kind of just the ground zero for where a lot of those protesters started throwing the rocks, the supplies, the debris at law enforcement, which in turn towards that 9 o'clock hour sparked the entire response that included that tear gas. So this is kind of, again, just a look at what was left behind. Alicia.
Ground zero here, but certainly a significantly calmer picture than what we saw 24 hours ago. A big development if you're just joining us here at 10 o'clock as well. 24 hours ago, we saw 2 Atlanta-based students, one Morehouse, one Spelman student arrested, tased last night in the middle of these protests after the curfew went into effect. 2 Atlanta police officers have been terminated today for what Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms called the use of excessive force, a significant change happening in a very short period of time, less than 24 hours since that incident happened right now, and police really wanting to make sure peace was in order for tonight. Brittany Miller is also covering this for us tonight in downtown Atlanta. Brittany, what are you seeing right now?
Officers, it looks like, are taking a break. They're sitting on the sidewalk here, just drinking some water, taking off those helmets, and really not making any moves just yet. But I want to show you just to give you an idea of how many officers are here all over downtown Atlanta. I want to take you on a walk with me. Follow me this way. So we have all those officers, National Guard, DeKalb County, Clayton County. Everybody is here parked at the intersection of Marietta Street and Centennial Olympic Boulevard. But if you walk over here, it doesn't take long. Just a few steps over here, you see more officers lined against this fence here, lined against even these side streets. So they are everywhere, ready for anyone who may even try to walk down a side street, walk down a main street, or make any moves in downtown Atlanta and violate that curfew. So this is something I hadn't really seen before, especially in the last 2 nights. They are at every corner. They are at every turn. Don't even think about coming down here to downtown Atlanta, because it is most likely and almost guaranteed, or is guaranteed, I'll say, that you will get arrested, because they are everywhere and they are seeing everything right now. So I just wanted to show you, just to give you an idea of how many officers are here downtown, or in downtown Atlanta, ready for whatever happens next. This is something that I have not seen in the past 2 days, Alicia and Tracy.
Good to see that the peace has been maintained so far tonight. Brittany Miller for us there. You've been covering this for the last 48 hours. We appreciate it. I want to get over to Haley Mason now, who is also on the front lines for us downtown. And Haley, earlier today, you were marching with a group of protesters on the 17th Street Bridge, on Spring Street. The messages, so much of change and hope. And tonight, I'm wondering how you're feeling right now as you're looking behind you right now with law enforcement out and relatively peaceful so far. For those protesters that were out and now that potentially have gone home for the night, adhering to the curfew in effect.
They didn't have much choice, Alicia. We were being completely bombarded with tear gas. Asking me how I feel, I'll give you a compare and contrast. For the first time tonight, I've heard the same silence that I heard from that peaceful protest earlier today in Midtown. That's just a comparison as to how quiet the streets have gotten here after rioting began again in downtown Atlanta. I'm going to move out of the way and just show you why we moved out of the street. We moved across the street to give you a different vantage point. You can see that no one can walk down these streets here because police, National Guardsmen, DNR, state troopers, they are armed and blocking all entranceways towards Centennial Park. Again, we are at Andrew Young International Boulevard. One street over is John Portman. Ted Turner's in the other direction. And right now, there are very few people left on the street. If you pan to the left, Eric, a little bit, I do want to show you that there are some people still out. They're not the protesters or rioters that we saw. I know we did report repeatedly that anyone on the streets right now is being arrested. I have to say that hasn't been completely true, but it's just been a few people here and there kind of just standing out and watching. Right now, though, I'm gonna let this fire truck pass. Not exactly sure what they're responding to. There have been a few people you'll see just kind of standing on the sidewalk here and there. It seems that the law enforcement is giving them a little bit of leeway. It looks like some of these people just pulled over from driving. You see one man is riding his bike there. So the streets are not completely empty, but in stark contrast, they are in stark contrast to what we saw within the last hour, where a construction site was being raided, where rocks and bricks were being taken, where metal and steel bars were being taken, And we, along with police, were being threatened by people who wanted to throw those items. And so there are no more fireworks. There's no more tear gas. There's no more chaos in the streets of downtown Atlanta right now, because nearly every resource that the state and city could collaborate together to bring out to these streets, they're out here right now demanding law and order, if you will.
All right, Haley Mason for us in downtown. Haley, stay safe on the front lines for us once again tonight, covering it all. One of the signs that we saw earlier today is that we can't go back to normal. That was a sign echoed across the protest. This is certainly not a normal Sunday night for us here in Atlanta. Astrid, I'm taken aback because behind you, you can't see it in your shot here, but the National Guard in full riot gear really backing up. And this is certainly such a stark contrast to some of the most popular tourist streets in our city. What are you seeing right now out there?
Right now I am right behind the guardsmen. They had their shields up before. They all lined up kind of blocking the street. You'll see them. They were shoulder to shoulder. They're being told, you know, to move back. But there are only about like 5 or 6 people here. You know, there's a very stark contrast to what we saw, you know, around the 9 o'clock hour. However, we are seeing the guardsmen here line up shoulder to shoulder, blocking the streets, blocking Centennial Park. Very, very different look, though, from Friday night and Saturday night. It's actually the first time that I've been reporting without a face mask because I don't have a crowd around me. And I also see the soldiers, they don't have their gas mask on anymore. Police officers are actually further down the street, and they are also formed in a line, but they've been there like that for some time. And actually, just right now, we see some patrol cars with some blue lights coming up in front of them. That is new. We did not see that here before, and they're actually also coming to my left-hand side down the street. More patrol units are gathering here at Centennial Park. I don't know if this is a meeting point, but I know what the city wants right now, what the leaders want, and even what so many of the protesters say they want is that they want to heal. And that's actually a sign that I saw in one of the buildings here earlier today. I'm going to show you in a little bit, but first we're trying to see, you know, what is going on here with the sheriff, DeKalb County patrol cars that we're seeing. That's what I'm seeing on the units. They're meeting in all different sides, but here's that sign that I was telling you. This is the feeling that a lot of people want. It says, let's restore, heal, stay home, and stay ATL strong. I have not been here in this side of downtown in a while, so for me this is the first time I'm reading this sign, but it definitely is the sentiment of a lot of the people that have been going through these protests in the last couple of days. But obviously you can't forget the message. It's not just about you know, going home. It's about making sure that we keep George Floyd's name going, and that's the message. For now, like I said, we just see a lot of activity. There's not really any citizens or any pedestrians, only about 5 or 6 people. But if anything else, of course, we're going to keep monitoring that situation.
Astrid, we appreciate that, and of course it is good to see that sign, and it's unfortunate I had to come to this to basically the major show of force in downtown Atlanta to get things under control after what started out as very peaceful protests, and unfortunately in part of this the message got lost. That so many people were marching and protesting. One man was asked, why do you do this? He says, because I'm black and I'm tired. And so many people want to end injustice. Let's go to Brittany Edney. Brittany, what are you seeing?
No knife. Hey guys, we got a caravan coming through right now as law enforcement starts to kind of pack things up and head out. I also want to show you that where this broken glass is kind of in the middle of this street and towards the edge over here, the sidewalk, you can see a lot of the canisters from the tear gas deployment that happened earlier in the night around 9:15 or so, when you saw a lot of the protesters and media start to get sprayed by that tear gas. But we have seen a lot of the law enforcement start to kind of head back this way towards a meeting point, start to gather and head out. We have DNR still on the ATVs right over here. They are gathered right over here on the sidewalk as they kind of wrap things up. I asked them if they were moving out anytime soon. They said they are still out here. They're still monitoring things, so we can see the ATVs parked over here on the sidewalk. I did ask another police officer, you know, how things were kind of wrapping up for the evening. They said that right now at this point they're still kind of just monitoring the situation, but we are starting to see a lot of movement throughout this area. And again, this kind of was the point of connection between both those protesters and law enforcement earlier today when you saw all those canisters get deployed of the tear gas that kind of went out through the crowd, that ultimately really was helpful in breaking up that crowd to get people to sort of pay attention and start listening to that 9 p.m. curfew. And that's ultimately when we really saw things start to kind of change, not only from our crew perspective, but also from crowd control and law enforcement response. We're still not seeing at this point a lot of stragglers. As far as protesters, a lot of them have either been arrested or have gone home. So again, kind of a lot quieter, calmer at this point. That earlier today was just kind of chaotic. Guys.
Absolutely, and unfortunately it was, and and that's what we're seeing across the country as so many protests pop up in major cities, Washington, D.C., of course, Dallas, Philadelphia, Phoenix, Minneapolis, Chicago, locations like that. Brittany, we're going to let you stand by for just a bit. Brittany Miller is also downtown as well. And Brittany, you've covered this story for the last 3 days now. I know you're exhausted. We appreciate all you've done. You've done an amazing job, certainly putting yourself on the front lines there in situations that weren't so safe. But because of you and all our other members of the CBS 46 family, we're able to bring this story and bring the messages of so many of those people who have protested peacefully to the rest of our community, to our viewers. What are you seeing right now? And as things calm down right now, how are you feeling?
Now that things have calmed down considerably, I'm sort of processing what I've seen in the past 3 days now, and what I'm seeing right now is unlike anything I've ever seen in the past 3 days. The first night, by this time, like I said, cars were burning. You saw broken windows at every single business here in downtown Atlanta. By this time last night, we were looking at that couple that was dragged out of their car near the Waffle House and tased and then detained and arrested. And right now, on night 3, now that we are an hour or two, I don't even know what time it is, but now that we're an hour or two, I'm thinking past that curfew that has gone into effect, it is peace and quiet in downtown Atlanta. There's nothing but law enforcement here. I did talk to my law enforcement source earlier today, or just a few minutes ago, I should say, and he said most of the main streets around this area are clear. They still have a couple of pockets that they need to get to, but for the most part, if you take a look around, it's pretty evident. It's pretty evident here. Officers are standing, they're talking, they're taking a break. Of course, they had a long day today. It's been a long 3 days for both protesters as they tried to get their message across of equality and justice, and it's also been a long day for officers as they did their job as well. It's been a long day for journalists as well, but we've just done our best to bring you coverage. And this is the scene right now. If you would have told me last night, the night before, that this would be the scene today, at this moment, at this hour, I would have been hard-pressed to believe you based on, what I'd seen the past 2 days, if I'm being completely honest, Tracy and Alicia. It's getting late, so, you got to call it like you see it at this point.
Right, and Brittany, it is now 10:17, so an hour and 17 minutes into the curfew that was imposed for tonight from earlier today. It's unclear if there will be another curfew tomorrow night or any other nights this week. Atlanta Mayor Keisha Lance Bottom saying basically they are looking at this day by day and reassessing each day as to whether there will be a curfew. We are hoping that there will be no need for one, but certainly this show of force and law enforcement shutting protests down very quickly. Not really, I take that back, not really shutting the protests down, but making sure people abide by the curfew would be a more accurate assessment of this. We have seen officers walk side by side with protesters, Alicia, throughout this, through Midtown Atlanta, walking with them saying, where do you want to go? I will make sure the streets are cleared for you as you go there. And many of those protesters saying, you know what, these guys are heroes, these Atlanta police officers who are willing to walk with us across town, around town, circle, in and between. These are heroes to us because they're listening to us and they're helping facilitate this.
Yeah, that was an Atlanta police lieutenant that we saw walking with a protest organizer down Spring Street. And what struck me about that was the fact that that protester and the police officer saying the most important thing happening today is that we're having a conversation, and through conversation, change will come. And certainly that has been the intent of the protesters all throughout the week nationwide here in Atlanta over the last 3 days. I do want to share the governor just tweeting within the last 10 minutes that members of the Georgia National Guard will be stationed at Centennial Olympic Park throughout the night. So they will be staying there throughout the night to make sure that order is maintained, to provide a support to ensure peaceful assembly. But certainly the curfew now in effect tonight through sunrise. It appears that the Georgia Guardsmen will be in effect in place at Centennial Olympic Park as well, to make sure that stays in place. Again, we have continuing coverage all throughout Metro Atlanta. There you're seeing Haley Mason in our shot there, Astrid Martinez as well, as you're looking at some of the armored vehicles that are also out now throughout the streets of downtown Atlanta in what's looking like a war zone, right? This does not look like downtown Atlanta on a Sunday night here, but this is what we are dealing with tonight as the nation reacts to so much that has transpired here over the last few days, and really a bubbling up of so much that has gone on over decades now at this time, years and years and years of unrest and injustice that needs to be solved for and changed potentially as well. As you look live at the Olympic rings here in downtown Atlanta. Tracy, I know our team is out and about here as they monitor conditions here. We want to go to Haley Mason as well, who's downtown. Haley, you're standing in front of some of those armored trucks that are out here tonight looking to maintain the peace that's in place right now.
The scene for the rest of the night here. The National Guard will be manning Centennial Olympic Park throughout the night, according to a tweet that Governor Brian Kemp just posted to Twitter. I mean, you said it, Alicia, it's very hard to realize and come to terms with the fact that this is what downtown Atlanta looks like right now on a Sunday night. We haven't seen this type of scene in Atlanta before. I will say I have covered these sorts of protests several times over the years. I was sent to St. Louis and Ferguson after Michael Brown was killed. I haven't seen military vehicles like this since then. I've seen fire trucks, I've seen dumpster trucks be used to block off roads during Black Lives Matter protests over the years, from Atlanta to Tennessee to Ferguson to the DMV area outside of Washington, D.C. But this is not something that we have seen in Atlanta, Georgia. This show of force, this military-style response to protests and then rioting. It was really not the protests that rendered this response. It was the rioting. It was some of the looting, and it was some of the dangerous violence that we saw, that everyone was at risk. Eric, if you can pan down just a little bit of symbolism here. This broken glass here on the sidewalk, this broken glass here in this parking lot is the reason why we see this type of military response here in downtown Atlanta, because everyone was in danger. It wasn't just that police were being threatened by rioters and some people that were very, very upset. Everyone was being threatened, and as fireworks were literally going off at our feet and rocks were being thrown beside our heads. And so some people argue that this is too much, but right now it's definitely necessary to keep people safe in a very confusing and a very heated time of tension.
Yeah, certainly a troubling time.
But if you want to take another look, yes, you can just see they're gathering and gearing up for the rest of the night here. They won't be going away, and that's pretty much a smart decision, because if they do leave, the night is still fairly young. We haven't even gotten to the 11 o'clock newscast yet. People would come back out, and so they will not be leaving. Tracy and Alicia.
Yeah, they will stay there, and they are also stationed in other locations across downtown, including the state capitol as well. Let's head over to Astrid Martinez. And Astrid, I know you were with us last night, as Brittany was mentioned, and other of our colleagues were mentioning as well. A stark contrast from last night. As things have calmed down now, I know that there were moments that you were very concerned not only about your safety and the safety of our crew, our photographer with you, but the safety of protesters and police as well, I'm sure.
Yeah, absolutely, because there is a building here that's under construction. So you have these metal bars and wooden, pieces everywhere, and they were pulling this out. So, there was a possibility that you could destabilize, that construction site, and it could have come crashing down on them. It could have come crashing down on us, on police officers, and that is definitely something that, we want to avoid, that law enforcement here wanted to avoid. As soon as they saw them, piling up those wooden pieces and putting, ripping fences off that building, that's when law enforcement and National Guardsmen decided to move in. But now this is just a much different look. Obviously, the protesters are not here, but I mean different look in different ways, because it's not chaotic, but also because look at downtown. You have this beautiful Ferris wheel lit up, all these, tall buildings that are inviting to tourists. And then at the ground, you have, the military here. You have police just all over the area guarding it. It's not something that we're used to seeing in person. It's something that we see on the news that happens in other places. It's what we see in movies. But at least we know that they're here right now. Things are calm. That they're going to be here all night is the message that we are being told by city officials. They're going to be positioned here, standing shoulder to shoulder. Right now, of course, they look relaxed, nothing's going on, but I know for them, they said it's a much needed rest. And also from one law enforcement, what he told me is that this is a successful night. What I hear from protesters too is that they are happy that the crowd that was peaceful stayed peaceful. They were very excited that law enforcement actually joined them, marched with them, got on the megaphone with them, and started spreading messages of unity. It's when they kind of collided with that other group that things kind of went disarray, but that usually happens in these type of situations. You can't just predict or expect that a protest is going to stay one way and not, go sideways or south. So that's why all these measures have been put in place. Definitely, a stronger force than Friday, and a stronger presence than Saturday as well. But this is just the scene here for the evening. If anything does, change, of course, we will keep you updated.
Astrid Martinez for us there. Moments of unrest, but a mostly peaceful day here in Metro Atlanta. Brittany Miller for us, also downtown tonight on the front lines for the last 3 nights. Brittany, we were saying how much different tonight looks than the last 2.
It really does. I really can't stress that enough. One prime example is the fact that I'm stuck in this parking lot. We had free reign for the past 2 nights. We were taking you up and down every single street in downtown Atlanta just to show you what was unfolding live. And at this moment, I cannot leave this parking lot. So I'm going to show you exactly what I can. Starting here, just so you can see who is here. We do have Clayton County officers to right in front of you. To the right, we have, to the right, Gino, if you can go this way, we can see officers on bikes here. If you look past them, you see the tanks. You also see those buses, and that is where everyone that is arrested, that is put in those flex cuffs, is taken to. And we have seen them being put into those buses. If you walk this way, Gino, let's just take them on a tour here. We are now seeing the National Guard actually fill this parking lot. We don't know if we'll be able to stay in here. This is the first time I'm seeing this tonight. They've actually walked from outside on the street, past the sidewalk, and into the parking lot where all of the other media is. Now, this is where we were told we had to stay. Again, when I tried to go out to the sidewalk, they said, no, stay inside. So now that they are in here, we don't know why they're in here. I just turned around and saw this. We're seeing this for the first time as you're watching it live. We're seeing more officers file in by the second. They keep on coming in through this opening here. Again, we don't exactly know what sort of form they're getting into or why they're doing this now. We don't know what this means. Of course, I'm going to work to find out. We don't know if we're going to be asked to move. Are we okay here?
I think we're going to have formations.
You're going to have what?
Formations.
Formations? Okay. So should we move back? Okay. All right. That's fine. We just don't want to be in the way. So this officer just told me that they're going to do formations. So we're just backing up a little bit just to give them some room. So we're just going to stay on this live if you guys are all right, just to see what happens now, because more officers are continuing to file in. I'm looking at dozens by the second. This is another thing I have not seen in the past. In the past 3 days, this is the National Guard, but again, they are filing in one by one to do formations, as I was just told when I just asked one of them why they were in the parking lot, because this is where the media has been staged, and this is again the area that I told you I was sort of confined to for the past few hours as that curfew went into effect. Watch your back, Gino. So we're just going to take a look live here to see exactly what they're doing. We're going to hang on this shot. This is something, again, I have not seen in the past 3 nights, because usually we had free range. But again, since we are confined to this parking lot, the National Guard has made their way into this parking lot, and they did ask us to back up a little bit, so we have done that, complying with whatever they ask us to do, and we're just going to sit and watch and wait to see what happens next. I don't know what formation this is or exactly what's happening here, but let's just hang on this and see what we can find out.
And Brittany, while we're watching this too, something else we hadn't seen from the National Guard, obviously we saw them out in force yesterday, but we hadn't seen them in potential riot gear like they are in today. And Governor Brian Kemp tweeting out earlier that the National Guard was given riot control training today in preparation for tonight.
Yeah, I hadn't seen that either. The only people I've seen in riot gear are Atlanta police officers, and they had been covered from head to toe. But yes, you do see the shields, you do see the batons, you do see the helmets, and you do see all protections on these National Guardsmen. So again, we're just trying to wait and see exactly what this formation is, why this formation is taking place at this very moment. The street behind them is completely clear of any other officers. As far as I can see, there's some more police to the left, but that's really their staging area for tonight, and it's been their staging area for the past couple of nights. Again, just to give you a quick recap of what we're seeing, you see the officers on bikes, you see the tanks behind them, you see the buses where anyone who is put in those flex cuffs or anyone that is under arrest is taken to immediately. And then to the right, I do see some Atlanta police officers, but it looks like the National Guard has taken over for right now, as they again have walked in, filed into this parking lot where the media was originally, and have gone into some formation. So I don't know if you want to hang on this shot or come back to me, or if you want to just see what happens here, guys.
Yeah, we can watch what happens for a moment, Brittany, and I'm sure, as you know, they have been a tremendous help, I think. We really saw the tide turn as the National Guard was brought in yesterday, and even more National Guards members for today by comparison to yesterday, as the governor extended that state of emergency across the state. So not only here in Atlanta, but in other pockets where protests have popped up, where there's been some violence and some vandalism as well. But it really seemed as though yesterday, not saying that that anyone had it out of control, but it just seemed more in control with the guardsmen backing up Atlanta police officers yesterday. Well, let's go to Yasmina Alston. She is in an area that seems pretty quiet. Yasmina, where are you?
Yeah, we're actually not far from the CNN Center, and you're right, it is really quiet compared to what we saw earlier tonight, earlier this evening, and of course on Saturday and Friday night as well. To give you an idea of exactly where we are, if you look down this road, can't see anything here tonight, but last night that was the scene where that officer was hit by a rider on an ATV, just to kind of give you a perspective of where we are. The streets are empty. I mean, all you see left is, you see the cones, you see some trash in the street. Nothing like what we saw earlier when that group of protesters came down this way and then ended up coming face to face, of course, with Atlanta police who were on this side. We're pretty close to where Brittany just was. We're just at a different angle showing you can see Atlanta police still blocking off this area here by the CNN Center. We see the National Guard on the other side. I know that Brittany showed you some formation that they were working on, but a much different picture from what we've seen the last couple of nights, and it's a lot earlier. Saturday night and Friday night, we saw a lot of commotion go well into the night. So at this time it's 10:30 and it's pretty empty out here where we are near the CNN Center.
Yasmina, and you mentioned that officer who was hit by the ATV last night. Just to give an update on his condition, we've learned his name today, Maximus Brewer. He was injured last night. He is still in the ICU, and from what Mayor Bottoms says, he still has a long road to recovery. And Chief Erica Shields saying she hoped he will be able to walk after this. He sustained major injuries to his leg, and Yasmina, we know you were a witness to that as it happened last night. Right now, we do want to head over to, we have another crew out in the field. Brittany Edney, really in the thick of things earlier today near that construction site in downtown Atlanta. And Brittany, certainly city crews will have their work cut out for them. They will have a major cleanup in that area come later tonight, tomorrow morning.
Oh, it's going to be a major cleanup, Tracy, and we are across from Skyview and that construction site that we were at earlier when, chaos broke out. But I do want to tell you a little bit about the fact that even though the protesters may be gone, it may be a little bit more quiet and more calmer and still out here, there are remnants of what happened just hours ago. Looking down here, you can see these canisters lining the street. This is where you were getting the tear gas from earlier from both the protesters, the media, everyone who was getting, just hit with that tear gas. It's from these canisters that were deployed here along the street when law enforcement started to push back against the protesters after they started throwing rocks and different things at police. And, as our crew has kind of discussed everything that's unfolded throughout this night, we just talked to our security guard from CBS 46, and he actually told us one interesting fact that over here at Centennial Park, where the National Guard was stationed throughout today with the park closed, that is where some of the tear gas canisters were actually being launched from. See, at first we actually thought that was from law enforcement in front of us, but it was actually coming from the side, and that is the tear gas that hit not only our crews but the protesters. So we were kind of getting tear gas from a few different angles that a lot of people didn't notice at first, but it was an observation that our security detail made later on to the night, and we just found out about. So, even as things are quiet now, we're still kind of learning a lot of the details that happened as things just kind of swept through this evening with all of the chaos that was around us. Tracy?
Yeah, there certainly is a strategy to this, Brittany. What looked like confusion moments and for moments while we thought law enforcement officers weren't doing anything, obviously they had a strategy laid out beforehand. Haley Mason also in downtown Atlanta as well. We want to get a look from her vantage point to see how things are there. Haley?
Tracy, we've been moving from block to block. Unlike Brittany, we're not confined to one parking lot. So we've been moving around to show you just how vast the military style presence is here at Centennial Olympic Park. We're at Andrew Young International Boulevard, where it intersects at Centennial Olympic Park Drive. And you can see the National Guardsmen have set up shop. They are here to stay, to maintain order and quiet through the rest of the night here downtown. You see so many military vehicles just lined up in formation, ready to be used if absolutely necessary. But right now there is no sign that it will be necessary to use them. Just the show of force alone has sent protesters back into their homes. Show of force, in addition to tear gas, I should say, has sent protesters back into their homes. And the National Guard, though, they are standing on the ready with their shields in front of them right here at the entrance of Centennial Olympic Park. And just down the block, there's a hotel to our left. There are very few people in the streets. Eric, if you can pan up this street here, you can see that there's only a few cars here at this point right now. Even some of the people that were just kind of hanging around and recording on their cell phones, they've moved back right now. The majority of the people that are out right now is media. And to be completely frank, just in comparison to what this looked like a couple of days ago, and honestly a couple hours ago, it's reassuring to see some things calming down. Just behind me, you see Centennial Olympic Park. We were out here Friday night when there were not just the Olympic rings, but literal rings of fire throughout this park. We were literally dodging glass bottles being thrown past our heads and rocks and bricks, knocking out the Omni Hotel windows, knocking out the College Football Hall of Fame gift shop windows. And we didn't feel that there was an end in sight. So this more aggressive approach is in response to all of that. You can see that construction site that we've been mentioning off to our left here is the barrier there is missing. I don't think you can see at my eye level because I'm a lot shorter than Eric, but the barrier there is missing right now because people came in and started stealing that equipment. And I will be honest, we got really concerned because no one was around when that was happening. And we saw people walking around with rocks and bricks and metal rods and steel rods in their hands. And so tonight, this swift response, this show of force combined with tear gas and then a continued presence of military-style vehicles and weaponry, honestly, is what's really keeping back people tonight.
Yeah, Haley, that was the frightening part, to watch some of those, that fringe group of protesters, not all protesters, a majority of the protesters that have been out the last 3 days have been peaceful, but to watch that fringe group amass stones, metal, pieces of wood, barricades, in order to use as weapons to fight back against law enforcement was frightening to see.
It certainly was, and I think the irony, it cannot be lost on us that we are standing at Andrew Young International Boulevard, who has promoted peaceful protesting. I know we called him the other day. I spoke with his wife just a few days ago, and this is nothing that they would have envisioned for the city of Atlanta. He was on the front lines of the civil rights movement. I sat down in an interview with Ambassador Young a few months back, and he kind of expressed that in some ways this generation has it worse than when they were protesting injustices and inequality and just blatant racism. And he challenged the new generation of people who want to be civil rights leaders to find ways to really engage peacefully and politically and socially. And today I talked to one protester who told us that he was upset at some of the chastising and even some of the admonishment coming from city leaders because he felt that his generation didn't really know how to protest and they needed to be taught by some of the leaders of old. And it was just interesting to hear him share that kind of transparency that he wanted to do it right. He wanted to be effective, and he did not want to be confused with a looter or a rioter because there is a difference between a rioter and a protester in many instances, despite some of that shared anger and that shared passion. And so I just thought that was so interesting to stand here on Andrew Young International Boulevard in Atlanta, the heart of peaceful protesting in the South, the heart of the civil rights movement, and to see such a scene behind us right now after chaos erupted. But I don't think the message is completely lost. I will say that. I know that it was a black scar through this weekend, but I would not say that the message is completely lost because today we saw a lot of effective movement today.
We absolutely did, Haley, and we are hopeful that many of those protesters who are out will also get out and vote. That is a message that transcends all generations, that we all have a voice in what happens in our government. All right, we want to head over to Astrid Martinez, who is not too far from those iconic Olympic rings and Skyview, Atlanta.
Yes, I'm right here, Tracy. We've been here all night with the National Guard. You can see them behind me. They're still standing shoulder to shoulder, a little bit more relaxed than around that 9 o'clock hour where they had to really clash with protesters, push them back and use that tear gas. But right now things are pretty calm. This is the mission that, of course, our state and city leaders wanted. They wanted to make sure that everyone followed that 9 o'clock curfew. And it doesn't seem like anybody is going to be really, especially in this area, going to be trying to break just because it's such a heavy law enforcement and police presence. And the funny thing that I forgot for a quick second is I took off my mask earlier saying, this is finally the first time where there's not these big massive crowds gathered and I can take it off. But we have to remember we're still going through this national pandemic that disproportionately affects minorities. So much that the city is going through right now to have this break, to kind of regroup and make sure that we rebuild and heal Atlanta is a nice message. And I heard Haley say that the message also is not lost on why these protests started. And I agree with her because when we were in the middle of that protest that was peaceful, People were talking about George Floyd. People were talking about making sure that it stayed peaceful. People were talking about uniting. They were walking, side by side with law enforcement. They were both, talking about coming together. So I agree completely with Haley that even though, we had a black eye on Friday and, some commotion expected when it comes to protesters on Saturday, today, for the most part, we're getting back to the message that is equality, eradicating racism. And we saw swift movements by the mayor and the chief this afternoon reacting very quickly. We're still waiting for 3 arrests in Minneapolis, and we're seeing what a difference in leadership these two, powerful and respected females in Georgia and Atlanta have. Very, different to what's going on in other sides of the country. And I know from reading on social media, a lot of people appreciate that. They feel like these two, women that are looked up to in this community really took action where it was needed, and maybe that could have helped, calm down some of the protests that were igniting because of that video that we saw, which is pretty shocking, and that CBS was the one that brought that to you. Our reporters, Jasmina and Brittany, were, the ones that captured that. So great work is what I'm hearing from law enforcement, a successful night. And I love the fact, too, that the message is not lost, that, we need to eradicate racism. We need equality. And that's what is a beautiful, message that the protesters are saying. They want to be heard. And it's nice to have those two come together. That when those conversations are had, that's when we have, some change.
Change and action is certainly the message of the entire weekend, the last few days across the nation. Astrid Martinez for us. Thank you, Astrid. And just a quick note, Astrid did mention the pandemic. Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms yesterday did encourage anyone that was out protesting over the weekend to get a COVID-19 test in the coming days, just to make sure, as we are not all out of the woods from this global pandemic, one that certainly has hit Fulton County and the city of Atlanta pretty hard. We want to go back to Brittany Miller, who's standing alongside the Georgia Guardsmen there in formation. Brittany, what's the latest there?
So we were talking about the National Guard being here in this parking lot. You're looking at them exit this parking lot right now. We had seen them in that formation that we brought to you live maybe 10 or 15 minutes ago. They stood in that formation for that duration. They actually said a prayer as well. I heard them praying for their safety tonight as they walked throughout the streets of Atlanta, and they just broke that formation, and now they are walking up Marietta Street. I'm not sure exactly where they are going. There are still a couple of guardsmen here, but it looks like they are walking out now as well. So they filed in, they stood here, they had their formation, they said their prayers, and now they are exiting the parking lot. Other than that, the street, if you can see behind them, no one is on it except for a few officers that are in patrol cars. There are several patrol cars parked along the sidewalk there. I'm counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 as far as I can see. And I do want to question if I can actually leave this parking lot now. Let me see if I can ask one of the guardsmen. Excuse me, sir. Do you know if we're able to leave the parking lot now, or do we still have to stay here? I know that before, when you guys were lined up, we had to stay in this parking lot. We're just walking down the street just so we can bring live coverage as we've been doing every single night, and just to see what's happening. We can walk? Okay, thank you. So it looks like we can go ahead and start walking the streets of Atlanta now. So we're actually going to get our equipment together and see if we can make that transition. I'm going to ask that you come back to us as we gather our equipment together so we can actually get on foot and get moving and give you the latest from the road. Alicia and Tracy, we just have to get this off the tripod.
All right, be careful as you move out. Brittany, we know you have been all evening, continue to do so. Our other Brittany Edney, is really kind of out in the streets, able to move around and survey some of the damage from what turned out to be a chaotic, really, couple of hours, Brittany.
Yeah, Tracy, it was, and I do want to talk about the first part of our day, and that is because we focused a lot on how the protest took kind of an ugly turn here earlier this evening, but we didn't talk about as much the few hours prior to that. Before our broadcast even started, my photographer and I walked for several hours with hundreds of college students, down through this area in support of both Messiah Young and Tanaya Pilgrim. I should say. They are the two college students who they were protesting in support of because of the brutality that they faced yesterday evening inside that car from that video that you saw from us at CBS 46 exclusively shot by Yasmina Austin. I can tell you, again, that those two officers were fired, and we have other ones on desk duty still, but that protest that was done by those college students in support of that, we saw nothing but a very unified, quiet, peaceful protest. There was several speeches given, and everyone tried to stay very contained and again peaceful. And so we don't want to take away from that which happened earlier in this evening. Again, things kind of took that turn once we got to this construction site after that protest ended, and we started seeing different groups and other protests kind of merge into one, and that is when kind of things hit a more destructive path down here right towards CNN in front of Skyview at this construction site, which we were at earlier, where you saw everything start to kind of come undone, so to speak. But again, the protest that we were at earlier, a lot of the speakers were talking a lot about how people didn't need to just be keyboard warriors and talk about social injustice, but they really needed to get out there and show publicly their support for both the Black community and also, everyone who has ever faced injustice. So we heard a lot about just the push for peaceful protests and in order to kind of put our country in a better direction. And that was an important message from those protesters and the organizers behind that protest earlier today. So I just wanted to kind of re-emphasize that message from them so that it's not lost amongst all this. Tracy?
Oh, absolutely, Brittany, and thank you for that, because this is something we talked about on Friday when we started our coverage, that we hoped the headline would not be violence, but would instead be the message that so many tried to get across, that they are just tired of the injustice and they would like to see equality, and also to stop seeing Black men, Black women die at the hands of law enforcement because of excessive force that has been used, deadly force in many cases. Haley Mason has been part of our coverage since Friday evening. And Haley, that is one thing that you've seen as well. These days start out extremely peaceful, and that message, unfortunately, sometimes can get lost in the chaos that ensues after.
Yeah, the message certainly can get lost depending on what happens after some people are triggered, if you will. I know that's a therapy word, but that is really what happens. And I'll say one thing that has been triggering, and for some people that have come out in protest, has been the sight of seeing very, very strong law enforcement presence. And when there were a lot of people out here Friday who had a lot of anger toward law enforcement, you saw some of that anger turn into violence. And that was unfortunate because a lot of people got injured, whether it was really widely reported or not, but it became dangerous. And so at this point, though, we're still at Andrew Young International Boulevard, and we have now seen the Georgia National Guard move off of the sidewalk, or at least out of that parking lot, and they are lining the sidewalk with their shields. They've made several different formations here right across from Centennial Olympic Park. Of course, I don't really know the tactical strategy or what their methods are or what the reasoning for their methods are, but we have seen them change positions and change formations several times. But our photojournalist Eric Hurst is showing you one angle down here at the front of Centennial Olympic Park, and then this guardsman lineup just pans all the way down the street. You see a couple men walking down on that end of the corner, but other than that, there are really not many people left in the streets. I'm not really sure how they're deciding who to let go on their way or who to really stop, but we're not seeing any type of arrests right now. We haven't seen any over here. We're just seeing a lot of military-style show of force right now.
Haley Mason covering this for us since the beginning, since Friday night. Haley, thank you. Stay safe out there tonight. I want to go back over to Yasmina Alston, who's a little bit closer to the CNN building, I believe, right now. Last time we checked in, Yasmina, what are you seeing?
Yeah, so we're about a block from the CNN Center, and when we showed you this during our last hit, we didn't see much going on down here, but if you look now, you can see the National Guard is set up here at this intersection of Ted Turner and Marietta. This is also that same intersection, again, that we've talked about from Saturday night when we saw the Atlanta police officer get hit by a rider on an ATV. This is that same intersection. So pretty cool here. We've got the National Guard set up. And we can see their vehicle over here, and the National Guard has been out throughout all of this tonight as the protesters have been throughout downtown Atlanta. But aside from the National Guard, aside from Atlanta police, law enforcement in general, we haven't seen any protesters. The streets are pretty much empty. Now we're looking back down towards the CNN Center. I believe Atlanta police over on the left side, closer to the CNN Center, and then the National Guard is what you're seeing straight ahead here. So again, a much different picture from what we've seen all weekend, from Friday night to Saturday night. At this hour, this was not what we were seeing on those nights. So very quiet now, a much different picture. Friday night.
Yes, Mina, thank you. As you mentioned, just a stark contrast from last night. We can tell you 157 arrests were made last night throughout this evening after those peaceful protests, and it looks as though we are seeing more people being taken away in those flex cuffs from Chopper 46, getting an overhead look there. We will have to wait until later on tonight or tomorrow morning to find out the total number of people who've been arrested. Actually, Astrid Martinez still standing by there, and still no sign of protesters. Streets pretty clear, only military and police presence, right? Still standing by there.
That's all we see here, Tracy. Take a look behind me. The guardsmen are still here, standing shoulder to shoulder, just in front of their shields, kind of just resting, hanging out, seeing what the night brings. For them, it's almost like, kind of business is over, because they've taken care of that mass protest that was going on. They were really tearing down buildings. So that part is over. But obviously the reason, there's a lady here that just showed up. She's asking who's in charge. But, that's like one of the only civilians that we see here inside Centennial Park. We see more servicemen or guardsmen. They're just, hanging out, because most of that work that I said has really been done. That was done about an hour ago. They're just really standing guard. They are supposed to be here all throughout the night to make sure that nothing really takes place. That's the message here downtown, and I wanted to leave you before we head into the 11 o'clock hour with this beautiful message that really just, warms me inside, and it says, let's restore, heal, stay home, and stay ATL strong. And I think part of that, even though, the job is done, which means, keeping protesters and looters off, part of that is just keeping that message going of equality, of eradicating racism, which, that part of the conversation is not over. But it's nice to see that some protesters and some demonstrators were satisfied with the discourse that took place this evening. And it's also nice to see that our city is not being torn down with excuses, of people that came from outside, according to Keisha Lamb's Bottoms, to do damage to our city and to make us look bad. Once the reports, do come out of who was arrested and where they came from, we'll have a better idea. That's what Mayor Keisha Lance said this afternoon during the presser, but she just said that the people of Atlanta, the ones that she knew, the ones that were organizing, didn't recognize a lot of the faces that were in the crowd, and that's how they were able to tell that the people that were trying to do damage were not from Atlanta, because the people that are from here know that this city was built by minorities for minorities, and when you have that message in mind, then you know that this is a city that is sacred and you do not want to tear down. In the meantime, we're going to stay here outside with the National Guardsmen and police officers, with them to see if anything happens. But from the looks of it, things are pretty calm, a big, sharp contrast from Friday night and Saturday night. And I think part of that also has to do with the leadership that our city has, our government, and also, the amazing city of Atlanta that is known for coming together and for rising up.
It absolutely is, Astrid, and the mayor and the chief of police calling those that fringe element that caused so much damage anarchists. Let's go out to Brittany Edney and see what her status is as we approach the 11 o'clock hour. Brittany? So much damage, anarchists.
Well, Tracy, DNR right now is starting to pull out with their ATVs. We've seen them kind of park and regrouping for the past 2 hours out here off of Lucky Street, but they are now starting to pull out. So unsure if they are leaving completely for the night, but they have kind of been just hanging out here along Lucky Street for the past 2 hours. I do want to show you really quickly just where one of the kind of destructive points of the night was, and that was this construction site where we took you through a few hours ago. This is remnants of the fire that was started, and a lot of these small rocks, that is what protesters were using. They were coming over here from this construction site, grabbing these rocks, throwing them at law enforcement. We were on the side actually originally with law enforcement when the rocks were getting thrown at us, and then that's when we moved, came down here to the other side, and then got the tear gas. So kind of either side was really just a, well, it made you kind of a target to get hit with something, and that is where a lot of the protesters rather just came to, was this construction site. You can see everything is still torn up around it. A lot of this debris and materials used by people as weapons to toss against police, but luckily, again, everything has died down, and at this point, it's just kind of the mess that has been left behind after all of this has happened. Tracy? Again, everything has died down, and at this
Brittany, thank you. CBS 46 News at 11 is next.
This is CBS 46 News at 11. Getting results.
CBS 46 News at 11 is next.
Guys, come to our shot. Come to our shot.
Getting results.
After review of that footage, Chief Shields and I have made the determination that 2 of the officers involved in the incident last night will be terminated.
Hands up! What do we want? Justice! When do we want? Now!
We as mothers, we are sick and we are fed up about burying our children.
We start with breaking news here at 11. Police clearing the streets of Atlanta, arresting anyone outside past the 9 o'clock curfew.
Now, this is the second night of people being told to go home. We do want to show you live pictures from downtown Atlanta tonight, showing one of the quietest nights we have seen in the last few days. A stark contrast compared to what happened hours earlier. It comes after a mixed day today when the sun was up. Protesters were peaceful. As the curfew approached, things turned violent. We do have team coverage tonight. We begin in downtown Atlanta.
CBS 46's Haley Mason joins us now live near Centennial Olympic Park. Haley.
Good evening, Tracy and Alicia. We are live right outside of Centennial Olympic Park on Andrew Young International Boulevard, where you can see the Georgia National Guard has set up shop for the night as Atlanta enforces a zero-tolerance curfew throughout the city. This comes after some peaceful protests turned violent in the last couple nights, and we saw that building up again today, and now we have this show of force to make sure it does not happen again. We were on the 17th Street Bridge earlier today, where protesters sat in the streets. They were quiet, they were peaceful, and they were actually harmonious, if you will, saying to us that we want you to know this is a peaceful protest. They marched up the 17th Bridge. They walked all the way down Spring Street and then arrived here downtown, moving from Midtown to downtown to Centennial Olympic Park. And that's when the tone began to change. I will say that they ended their protest with an officer, a white Atlanta police officer, who they thanked profusely for helping keep them safe and to block off the streets and to march with them for miles. They credited him with helping them pull off their protest. That was a very special moment, I will say, of harmony to see the officers and those protesters march together. It is something that we had not seen much of, especially as 2 officers were just fired today and 3 others placed on desk duty duty after showing excessive force in arresting 2 local college students. But tonight here, after that peaceful protest ended right where I'm standing, we saw rioting honestly pick back up. And now you see the National Guard, Atlanta Police, Georgia State Troopers here in downtown Atlanta. The National Guard will be here through the night, according to Governor Kemp, so that nothing turns violent or dangerous again. Alicia and Tracy.
Haley, thank you. That story you just mentioned, we are getting breaking news. We are seeing for the first time the body camera footage of the moments leading up to Atlanta police tasing 2 college students who were leaving the protest last night. You saw it live right here on CBS 46. We were covering at the time. Our cameras were rolling when it happened. Atlanta Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms and Police Chief Erica Shields both seeing that video and condemning the officers involved and firing officers Ivory Streeter and Mark Gardner. Now here's some of that body camera footage showing you what led up to that moment. We want to show it to you because according to statements from the officers, the couple's car was stopped on International Boulevard when Officer Hood, you're seeing his video here, asked the driver, Messiah Young, to move. Young refused, and you can see Young starts recording the interaction on his phone. Officer Hood tells Young he'd be arrested if he didn't move his car, then opens the door and tries to grab him. There's a lot going on here. Young drives off and pulls up to where traffic is stopped ahead of him, and that's when officers swarm the car. Hood makes his way to the passenger side.
No, I don't know what's going on. Okay, stop the car! Stop! Stop! Okay, I'm getting out! I'm getting out! Stop! Stop!
And that video is hard to watch, but we did want to show you in its entirety to understand what happened today and what led up to the firing of those 2 officers. That body camera footage from Officer Ivory Streeter, you could see he was the officer who tased 22-year-old Messiah Young last night. Officer Streeter has been fired from the Atlanta Police Department. Now, the young woman was released late last night, and the driver, Messiah Young, he was released from custody this morning. Atlanta Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms has asked all charges against Young, who was the driver, to be dropped. Now, we did post the full videos from the body cameras worn by all 7 officers. We put that on our website at CBS46.com.
CBS 46's Brittany Miller spoke with that couple moments after they learned the officers were fired. Brittany.
So I did speak to Tanaya Pilgrim earlier today. She was visibly shaken up. In fact, while we were doing our interview and some officers drove by, just driving down the street with their sirens on, you could see that she was uneasy. It was visibly apparent on her face. She said that she thought that she was going to die. She did not know what was going to happen, and actually telling me that she was here, right down the street here at Centennial Olympic Park, protesting before they got into their car, and they were just driving away from the scene. And she says she had no idea what was happening next. I want to go ahead and allow you to listen to that interview that I had with her, that exclusive interview that I had with her earlier today.
What was going through my mind, I honestly, I can't even tell you guys. I was just so terrified. I didn't know what to do. What was going through my mind was how not to die. That's what was going through my mind.
So that was Tanaya Pilgrim. As we show you images of officers leaving the scene in downtown Atlanta, she says that she is going to take it easy. She wants people to know that she is okay physically. I asked her how she was doing mentally, and she said that she did not want to talk about it, but of course we're going to keep in touch with her family. Her uncle did reach out to me today and say, even what we heard the mayor say and so many people across the country say, that without that video that was actually taken by my colleague Yasmina Alston, without that video, they don't know what would have happened to her or those officers. So that's the latest here, but I'll send it back to you guys.
What are we going to do to make sure that this never happens again? That's what I need to know so that I can be assured that what you're saying is actually true.
Well, college students and recent college graduates united in their fight for justice and equality after seeing that video. That march ended at Centennial Olympic Park, where we saw a lot of activity.
CBS 46's Yasmina Alston and Brittany Edney are live for us near that park tonight. We start with Yasmina Alston.
Yeah, so we're right here near the CNN Center. We've moved back some from where we were initially, where the National Guard is. Let's let you get a live look at what we're seeing here. Obviously, no protesters. You're seeing the media set up over here now that we don't have police that are blocking this intersection anymore. It looks like everyone's sort of clearing out, taking a minute to just catch a breath, get some water after another day of protests, day 3 here in downtown Atlanta. The National Guard is still out here, Atlanta police. I saw DeKalb County, it looked like they were leaving. Georgia State Patrol came through. We've got an Atlanta fire truck here as well. So everyone's just sort of taking this time to wind down after day 3 of those protests. Definitely a much different image, again, of what we were seeing earlier tonight, on Saturday, and on Friday as well. Earlier this evening and tonight, this entire area was filled with protesters. And we had police set up over here towards the CNN Center, of course, blocking the protesters from moving back any further. Then we watched as police slowly moved the protesters down and dispersed them. A much similar image to what we also saw on Saturday night when the protesters were dispersed and we started seeing those arrests. And of course, some of the other reporters tonight have been talking and showing you some of those arrests that we saw tonight. Again, it's quiet at this hour, very different from what we've been seeing all weekend. Day 3 of the protests, and law enforcement are taking a break out here. And we'll toss it on over to Brittany Edney now to tell us where she is and what she's seeing. Yeah, Yasmina, this is what's been left behind, the remnants of a very kind of destructive evening that happened once 9 p.m. Came along and that curfew was instilled and protesters did not leave. Unfortunately, they came head to head with a lot of law enforcement here along this street, and this construction site was essentially used as ammo against police as protesters picked up a lot of rocks, wood, debris, and supplies and threw it that way. And moments later, as soon as we started reporting about that, showing you live what happened, that's when the tear gas started coming. You could see fireworks going off, smoke in the area as well. It really just was a very chaotic scene. But I will tell you that surprisingly, it was, for how chaotic it was, it got broken up really quickly. Within about 30 minutes, everything started to settle down. Law enforcement came out in full force, and we just saw them all night long, just really enforcing that and making a lot of arrests or detainments tonight. Guys.
Our team coverage now continues with Astrid Martinez, who is also in the thick of this afternoon's protests. Astrid?
And Tracy, right now I think the message is arrest and restore the city, restore the hearts of the people that are on edge, that feel like their message, even though they felt that it was heard tonight, they want to still keep it going. They want to see that change. They want to see the change in the systems that they feel have systemic racism. But for the most part, they felt that they were heard today. I started out my day with the protesters that were peacefully demonstrating. They were walking from 17th Street. They were walking from Atlanta Station up here, making their way through the downtown area, past Centennial Park to the Ferris wheel. They sat down in the middle of the street. There was, dozens and dozens of them, but they were excited that this was a peaceful protest. They were very proud of that, and they were very proud to join hands and stand side by side with law enforcement and say that this is what they want. They want unity in a city that is known for unity, in a city that's known for love. have for influencing everything, and they wanted to make sure that that message above all else remained, that they want to come together and make a change. Now, as we talked about, it did, clash a little bit when the protesters that were demonstrating peacefully kind of, encountered the ones that weren't, and then that's when things, went a little bit south, and they went south rather quickly, but they also were changed rather quickly. Law enforcement, they started moving in along with the National Guardsmen. They deployed some tear gas, and very quickly we saw that crowd disperse. And now this is what we're seeing today. Just a quiet evening here with National Guardsmen standing shoulder to shoulder. And they are supposed to be here throughout the night to make sure that the city stays this way.
Astrid, thank you. We do want to go back out to Brittany Edney, who is near a construction site where a lot of protesters, some of the fringe element of those protesters, were making their own makeshift barrier. Brittany?
Oh, you're on. You're on.
Yeah, guys, this has been a very chaotic evening, and we were just outside of this construction site. I wanted to show you again where this diesel fuel tank was a point of contention for protesters as they came up to our crew and told us that they were threatening to light that. Essentially, that was a turning point for our CBS 46 photographer, myself, our security guard. We made sure as soon as that kind of threat came in that we left this area, but it was a very contentious evening as protesters used whatever they could from this construction site to kind of use that as ammo against local law enforcement. So again, right now it's a remnants of a scene that was very destructive and full of a lot of emotion and tensions.
Brittany, thank you. And we can see National Guardsmen moving out behind you. And Alicia, certainly has been a very dramatic day. Quickly, as Astrid mentioned, what started out as a very peaceful protest, now in day 3 of these protests, and things changed certainly quickly. If we can kind of show some images of downtown Atlanta, that would be great. But this a stark contrast to the last few days of protests that we've had in downtown and parts of the metro area, including Buckhead, where unfortunately we saw some violence on Friday. But as we see all those guardsmen lined up, they will be protecting Centennial Olympic Park throughout the night.
That's right. Governor Kemp about an hour ago tweeting out that the Georgia National Guardsmen, now up to 3,000 that are available for use throughout the state of Georgia, will stay at Centennial Olympic Park until the curfew expires, which happens at sunrise. Their goal there is to support local law enforcement and make sure peace is maintained overnight. Again, a very different scene 24 hours later from what we saw Saturday night and certainly Friday night. And today, though, overall, I think the messages have been heard. The protest mostly peaceful, and tonight, despite some rising tensions as we neared the 9 o'clock curfew hour, overall the day was marked with a message of change and action, one that resonated here in Metro Atlanta and really across the nation.
All right, let's go back out to Yasmina Alston, where she has been have remained very quiet. And Yasmina, you've been covering these protests since day 1, which was on our Friday, throughout the weekend. I wanted to ask, how your thoughts on today and really the change in mood today compared to the last 2 days.
Well, we showed you earlier this evening and tonight there was obviously a lot of chaos still here near the CNN Center for day 3 of those protests, but it was nothing compared to what we saw on Saturday night, compared to what we saw on Friday night. This was the area where Atlanta police were set up and protesters filled this entire intersection. Tonight it is empty. We have law enforcement left. You see Atlanta Fires here. The National Guard still has some of the intersections blocked off, but all of those protesters have since gone home. They've left this area. We had the 9 o'clock curfew tonight, so a much different picture, a lot quieter than what we've seen for the past 2 nights, and of course earlier in the night as well.
Yasmina, thank you. Let's take a live look over downtown Atlanta tonight. As Yasmina mentioned, certainly a different image here as we see a lot of those National Guard troops move out, and we can see those buses, Alicia, where a lot of those people who were detained throughout the day, that's where law enforcement was putting them in those flex cuffs as they picked up people one by one, really making quick work of shutting any kind of violence down that could possibly spark up after the 9 o'clock curfew was put in place.
That's right, Tracy. Saturday and Friday night in total, we saw 228 people arrested in the city of Atlanta. It's going to be several hours before we know how many arrests were made tonight. But police were out in force tonight. There was a no tolerance policy if you were in violation of that 9 o'clock curfew. This is a live look right now from Chopper 46 over downtown, and I believe that's the CNN Center once again. Again, where really this started some of the most violent protests that we saw back on Friday. I want to go back to Brittany Miller as well. Brittany, you have been covering this since the very beginning on the front lines for us. Tell us what you're seeing right now.
In the last maybe 15 minutes or so, I've seen several officers leave the scene here from DeKalb County to the National Guard. What you're looking at right now is all that is left. We see a lot of media on the left-hand side here on the corner, but if you look farther back where those blue lights are, you can see just a couple of police patrol cars. You see a tank there, and this is just a fraction of what we had seen earlier and really throughout the day when I had showed you those images of what looked to be a show of force where you could see different officers at every single corner of this intersection at Centennial Olympic Park and Marietta Street. But right now the scene is clear. I have not seen the streets this empty since maybe 4 days ago before all of this began. So it looks like the work here for these officers, for law enforcement, is done for now for those that have already left. I'm sure a few are still going to stay here. It looks like the officers on bikes have left the scene as well. So this really cleared out pretty quickly compared to what we've seen the past 2 nights. What you're seeing in front of you is the Clayton County Sheriff's SWAT vehicle. They're actually taking a right turn onto Marietta Street. It looks like they're leaving as well. So we're seeing this scene just clear out. And what's interesting, I just want to point this out, and I wish I could show you this on TV. Maybe my next hit I will. But I'm starting to see those cans of gas that were thrown into the crowds of protesters, that tear gas that was just so powerful that really brought so many of us to tears and really got into our lungs and had created this horrible reaction and dispersed those crowds. But now as you walk throughout the streets, you can see that the streets are clear. You're seeing that. You're also seeing the rocks that were thrown at officers throughout the day. So I just wanted to make that point and give you a live look at what we're seeing now, guys.
Yeah, and certainly public works crews will have a lot of cleanup to do throughout the night and into the morning. It's unfortunately what we saw late into Friday night and into Saturday morning, and even a lot of Atlantans and people who live in the downtown area and nearby came out to help clean up as well, and no doubt we will see that going from tonight into tomorrow. Let's go back out to Brittany Edney, because Brittany, this for you was one of the first days that you were here covering the protest, but no doubt watching this wall-to-wall coverage that we've had for the last 3 days. Your thoughts in being in the middle of it and watching, in some ways the message unfortunately turned to one of police going head-to-head with the protesters compared to where it started.
That was a 180-degree turn, because what started was a very inspiring, a very positive message. It felt a lot like community as we walked a solid 4 to 5 miles with protesters for about 2 hours in a very calm, united, peaceful way. We have a recap on that on our social media, on my Twitter and also CBS 46's, so that you can go and check that out and don't miss that, because we have a lot of videos and pictures and great statements there that really should not be missed. But I want to tell you that really took a turn in the 9 o'clock hour once that curfew stopped. Here is an aerial view right now. You can see the fireworks going off. You can see a fire that was started at the construction site, which is where our crew started to see a lot of that destruction and chaos and a little bit of violence break out as protesters tried to fling construction supplies and rocks and things at police. And that is when law enforcement kind of came in response with tear gas, which a lot of us experienced, both in the media and the protesters and onlookers alike. I can tell you, though, from the aerials, you can just see that kind of street erupt in color from both the fires, the fireworks, and also that tear gas and smoke. Again, it was just so different from what we saw hours before. But what was weird is that it happened very quickly and then it dispersed very quickly. And I think that was because of a very strategic approach from law enforcement as they pushed their way through in a very united way with multiple jurisdictions here this evening in response to those protesters. So it was definitely, Tracy, to answer your question, a very emotional turn, but it was one that luckily ended a lot quicker and safer than we've seen from the rest of the evening from all of our CBS 46 coverage. Tracy.
Brittany Edney on the front lines for us tonight. Yes, we are so grateful it was not worse tonight. Brittany, thank you. Stay safe out there. I want to go back over to Astrid Martinez, who's near Centennial Olympic Park and Atlanta's historic, notable Ferris wheel. Astrid, last time we spoke, you were talking about messages of hope despite the scenes that we're seeing behind you right now.
Yeah, and actually behind me right now is another message of hope. I'm going to have my photographer zoom into the building where I just saw this sign. He saw it earlier, pointed it out to me as well. It says, "Let's restore, heal, stay home, and stay ATL strong." Hopefully a lot of people see that and, heed the message, especially tonight, because that curfew is being enforced. So you need to stay home or you will encounter force, more force than you were met with on Friday and more force than you were met with on Saturday. They want to make sure this stays in control and that no one gets hurt. No more rioting, no more looting. But that doesn't mean that the message has to stop. The message will continue. That's the message of the people in Atlanta and across the nation that we've seen in the last week, which is, people want equality, people want justice, and they want it done swiftly. And they want it done for people of all colors, genders. And that message is going to keep going despite the hours. And it's one thing that I was also, thinking about when you said in the historic district, this park has seen some good times, some tough times, and definitely this weekend has been one for the history books. When we look back on this weekend, we're going to see everything that transpired from Friday until today. We don't know how long it's going to go on when it comes to the protests, but hopefully the violent part ends soon and the part where people start coming together and wanting change and making that change happen goes a little bit faster. So things like this don't really have to come and destroy a city that was built for the people, by the people.
Yeah, Astrid, we are hoping this is only a moment in history, and as we took a look at those Olympic rings, it's really a symbol of hope, not only from what this country can do, but how this country can heal too, hopefully from this. We want to take a look at Chopper 46 right now over downtown Atlanta, because as all our crews mentioned, we have a number of military units starting to head out, obviously where Astrid is. The National Guard plans to stay there throughout the night to stay in guard over Centennial Olympic Park in that downtown area there, just to make sure no one comes in to cause any trouble. So we are taking a look at those military units, those men and women from the National Guard, getting some rest. They've been on their feet all afternoon, had earlier today some riot control training as well, so we can see them resting. And it has certainly been quite a day and a very long weekend for so many in law enforcement. APD officers over the last 3 days have been backed up by about 20 local, state, and federal agencies as well to make sure to bring crowds under control, to make sure people abide by the curfew, which was in effect 9 o'clock tonight as well as last night. We will see if that happens again tomorrow night. We will, of course, keep you posted on that. In the meantime, we do want to head out to another one of our crews. Haley Mason is actually standing by for us as well as we kind of stand and watch some of the National Guardsmen just take a moment and kind of laugh and have camaraderie. Haley? Stand and watch some of the national.
Tracy, we actually moved one block over from Centennial Olympic Park Boulevard over to Ted Turner Enterprises, where this was the scene. Broken glass began shattering. Glass began shattering as protesters, some turned to rioters. And this is why we see that National Guard presence here tonight in downtown Atlanta. They were actually guarding this building at the Turner Foundation just minutes ago. They marched out. They're now one block over, so they're on either side of us. But I will say that earlier today, as you mentioned, we did see a lot of harmony between peaceful protesters and officers. There's one particular Atlanta police officer, actually a white police officer, that the protesters thanked repeatedly for helping them to clear the streets and block off all of Spring Street as they marched from Midtown right here in front of Centennial Olympic Park in downtown Atlanta. Atlanta. So that, I thought, was a very unique moment in the narrative that we are seeing play out here as protesters demand justice against police brutality, against racism, against inequality. And we see some of the varying remnants of how that passion and anger has played out, from vandalism, unfortunately, to harmonious protesting alongside police officers. It's very complex, it's very layered. There are a lot of nuanced cultural and societal issues here, and we're trying to cover all angles of it live here on CBS 46 tonight. Tracy.
And Haley, you've been on the front lines covering this story as it has evolved over the last 48 hours, really the last 72 hours now since Friday. Thank you for your work on the front lines there. And yes, we were all touched, I think, when we saw that officer and the protest leader coming together today, marching down Spring Street. And really, we salute so many of the demonstrators that were out today, knowing that their safety was not guaranteed during those protests. Yasmina Alston also on the front lines for us since Friday. Tell us what you're seeing right now behind you.
Well, Alicia, the movement that we have right now is a lot different than the movement that we had earlier. You can see Georgia State Patrol just drove by. We've got an Atlanta police van over here. The media, of course, were left here as well. But this area was filled with protesters earlier. We saw different pockets, different groups of protesters that came to the intersection right by the CNN Center, and of course were met by Atlanta police, who had the road blocked off to get to the CNN Center. And we, of course, were showing you those moments when the protesters, they would throw things, they were pushed back, and we saw Atlanta police disperse them back away from this area. And then some of the other reporters showed you those arrests that happened. So a much different picture here tonight as law enforcement takes a minute to breathe, and some of them are packing up as we speak. We're live in downtown Atlanta. Yasmina Alston, CBS 46 News.
Yasmina, thank you. Of course, we are all taking a moment to breathe after a busy 3 days. At some points chaotic, and certainly at some points heartwarming as well. You know, we've watched the coverage from front end to back end, and we are very happy, Alicia, that we are ending on a peaceful note this Sunday night.
A message of change, a message of action not lost over the 3 days for so many, the thousands that came out to make sure their voices were heard. Tracy.
Stay safe and have a good night from CBS 46 News.
Not lost over the 3 days for so many, the thousands that came out to make sure their voices were heard.
Stay safe and have a good night from CBS.
Oh. Không, để con vẽ đi này.